Now, we know about this religious settlement that Elizabeth has, should we say, set up in Britain, but we need to talk about it from the Catholic perspective. See, Catholics are the ones that are going to be angered by Elizabeth most of the time. Elizabeth herself is a Protestant, so they are the group she's trying to appease. See, actually, when Elizabeth came to the throne, Catholics were scared of her. The Queen beforehand, Mary I, had been very, very pro-Catholic, very, very anti-Protestant. Anti-Protestant to the extent of burning people at the stake. So when there was a switch over Protestant leader, Catholics were very worried that they would be the ones being burnt at the stake. But as we know, Elizabeth came to them with compromise. They could see themselves in church services. They were being told to go, but frankly, recusancy fines were really low for Catholics in Britain, and arguably, if we think about it, there's no reason not to like this. They weren't being killed. They were being allowed to worship the way they liked, and frankly, this religious settlement made Catholics, generally in England at least, be quite happy under Elizabeth. They are allowed to worship in private, they are allowed to do what's needed, but they're not being killed. So that's pretty good. Amazing. Well done, Elizabeth. You've settled. The religious settlement is settled. There is no need for anyone to be upset anymore. But there's still a couple of issues. See, as much as they are major issues, Elizabeth herself is something that Catholics can have an argument about. See, as we've spoken before, do Catholics believe in divorce? No. Henry VIII, Elizabeth's dad, what did he have to do to have Elizabeth in the first place? Oh, he had to have a divorce. So is Elizabeth a legitimate child in the eyes of many Catholics across the world even? No. According to Catholics in Britain, Elizabeth was not a legitimate child of Henry VIII. She should never have inherited the throne according to their religion. It should be someone else. That someone else is going to be in a lot more detail is Mary, Queen of Scots. She is someone that is in the line to the English throne, and she is a Catholic. She could be this alternate reason. So some Catholics were leaning towards this Mary Queen of Scots angle, but no one needed to. There was no actual purpose because, well, I mean, Elizabeth is queen already. How are we going to get rid of her? Why should we? She's being nice to us. Come on. So the settlement quelled most of the people that felt about Mary Queen of Scots. But we have this thing called the Papal Bull. Now, you might not be sure what those words exactly mean, but if we go through them one by one, papal is a word that's used to refer to the actions of the Pope, right? So the papal command, the papal bill, the papal issue of address, right? It is the Pope doing something, and bull at this time literally means a law, decision, or command. So the papal bull is a command by Pope Pius V. Pope Pius essentially had been watching Elizabeth. He'd been watching how she was treating Catholics, and he looked at her settlement and he decided on his own that this was not good. He decided to excommunicate Elizabeth, essentially to say she's a sinner in the eyes of God, that she is against Catholics, and he commanded Catholics all around the world to go against her. In fact, I'm going to read you what he exactly said. So this is the Pope's message that would have been written and read out in churches across the world. Elizabeth, the pretended Queen of England and the servant of crime, has followed and embraced the errors of the heretics. We declare her to be deprived of her pretended title to the crown. We charge and command all the nobles, subjects, peoples that they do not dare obey her orders, mandates, and laws. He calls her a pretender to the throne, a servant of crime, a heretic, someone who's, should we say, not following the laws of Catholicism. And he tells pretty much everyone, not just in England, but outside of England, to not dare obey her. Catholics can't really refuse this instruction. The Pope is their leader. The Pope is their religious, should we say, connection to God. He is the one closest to God on earth, according to Catholics. So whatever he says is the word of God. So all Catholics have essentially, in 1570, there's a moment where they are told by God that they have to go against her. And if you can imagine, the ones living in England have to kind of figure out what they're doing. What are we going to do? Are we going to, support or against? I'm not sure. But Elizabeth has to also deal with this. She doesn't not hear about the Papal Bull. Oh, I've been excommunicated by the Pope. Oh my God. The Pope has essentially incited violence against Elizabeth. Elizabeth can either wait for it to happen, or she can change tactic. She can ensure that Catholics do not inflict violence upon her. She can make sure in advance that they do not get anywhere close to killing her. And we already know that rebellions do get stopped by her. Elizabeth is not the kind of person to let stuff lay down and just let things happen. So after 23 years of her religious settlement, she changes it. When Catholics said that they could worship in private, no, she bans Catholic Mass. It's now considered treasonous, punishable by death in 1581. The recusancy fines that were low get increased. So now that any Catholic can't just pay off the fine, they have to go to church or they're going to be made absolutely destitute. It became treasonous to have a Catholic priest in your house. We know that this was broken a lot of times because there are these things called priest holes in a lot of Elizabethan country houses, essentially a hidey hole. But we know that people needed that. They purpose-built a space for their priest. And even as well, they were executed for holding mass. And this one's crazy to me, but should we say Catholics were not allowed to move 5 miles away from their home. So these Catholics who were on Elizabeth's side possibly had to deal with this kind of emotional struggle to go, am I going to be on a side, or do I side with the Pope, or do I go to hell, or do I have a nice time right now? Gosh, I don't know, what do I do? But once Elizabeth changes her tune, because frankly she has to, Elizabeth's bad and the Pope's telling you to go against her, most Catholics in Britain, after the Papal Bull and after these new resolutions to affect Catholic lives, most of them are going to have to go against her. And most of them are probably going to want to support rebellions against her, which you already know a few. Now, that does not mean it's at the end. There is some other things that happen. See, it's not just Catholics in England. We're going to talk about Catholics in England, but you need to know what Catholics abroad were doing. Catholics who were not in England, Catholics from other countries. So I'm just going to remind you of a few things that other Catholics did to try and influence and change England from the outside. If you know what the College of Douai is, the College of Douai is a college, well, it's a training school, a seminary. They train priests in the Netherlands, which is close by to England, to specifically just get shipped over to England and try and convert people to being Catholic. They're going to try and convert England back to Catholicism. As well as that, a group called the Jesuits, or the Society of Jesus, a similar group that go over and, should we say, try and convert England, also begins to exist by sending what that's called a missionary over to England. So if you hear these phrases, Jesuits, missionaries, or College of Douai, those are all to do with conversion. Now, you probably can predict from what Elizabeth did to Catholics at home, but Jesuits were not seen very well. There was a law to specifically kick out Jesuits from England in 1585, and even some were executed. We'll talk about one in a little bit. But then there are other things than just trying to convert England back. The main Catholic powers in Europe, France and Spain, but pretty much every other country was Catholic as well, tried to influence Britain to change. For example, they supported rebellions. They offered money and gave money to them. In fact, actually, they tried to marry Elizabeth to then take over via this kind of like male-dominated role. If you remember, Philip II and even the Duke of Anjou tried to marry Elizabeth, but they didn't, right? But those were the first attempts. But later on, they continued to support the Jesuits, support other revolutionaries. They set up Douai, and even they attacked Elizabeth, which we'll talk about in a little bit later anyways. But all of this is due to that feeling and that tension between Catholics and Protestants, and now that they've actively been put against each other. If you can, from this video, from this topic, be able to explain the feelings of Catholics towards Elizabeth before and after the Papal Bull, what the Papal Bull was intended to do, Elizabeth's reactions to the Papal Bull, and even what the Catholic powers were doing outside of England to influence it, you definitely know this section. This one has a lot of information in it, I will agree, so please go back through it and try and be able to recite and recount yourself what was happening to religion, at least in Elizabethan England in 1570. See you later, have a good day.